You're listening to Don't IEP Alone with special education advocate Lisa Lightner. For more information about Lisa, the IEP Toolkit, and more ways we can help you in your process, go to adayinourshoes.com. Now back to the show with your host, Lisa.
Good morning. Lisa Lightner here. I wanted to go over something briefly. I'm going to try to explain this in as simple terms as possible about a court case that the new administration just lost, and it's a big deal. And people aren't really understanding it all. And of course, there's about 20% of the American population who is committed to not understanding this. But for those of you who like details, like to know the facts of what's going on, I'm going to try to explain this to you. In 1974, we have a law. We passed a law that is called the GEPA, and it's the General Education Provisions Act. So basically what that law says is that, like, the federal government oversees education, but they are not permitted to implement or prescribe or dictate a specific curriculum. So in other words, all of this, let's return education to the states. It has always been up to the states, right? Since 1974, it has been up to the states. And the federal government has always, right, in our lifetime, been prohibited from implementing a specific curriculum. So all these things about DEI and CRT and SEL, the federal government cannot force a school district to do this. It has always been up to the states, and I've long been screaming that parents like us need to get involved in the state and local elections, and that we have turnout is poor even when it's a presidential election, but when it's an off year and it's just school board and stuff like that, county commissioners, county executives, those people often have far more influence over your day-to-day lives than the president. So there's a reason that Moms for Liberty is, like, they're doing this whole thing where they're recruiting people to go out and run for school boards all across the country. And they know this, and they know that's because it's the local school board who decides what you're going to teach or what you're not going to teach, and book bans and all that fun stuff, right? So, okay, so that's the GEPA. It's always been left up to the states since 1974, so 51 years. Now, the GEPA also limits our federal government's ability to withhold or terminate education funding without due process. Recently, an executive order went out and it said, if you do DEI initiatives in your school, we're going to withhold your federal funding. Of course, a bunch of states got together and sued over this, and so far that they're winning, right? The courts found that this was likely unlawful because the executive branch cannot unilaterally add new funding restrictions without following the GEPA procedural safeguards. See, there's that word again, procedural safeguards. So the GEPA, it's funny because the GEPA requires that if you're going to withhold federal funding, essentially that you send the people a PWN, right? It's funny. And I say that, sarcastically, but it's true. The GEPA requires that if you're going to cut federal funding, that the school or the institution, so remember, it can be public school, colleges, libraries, if you're going to cut federal funding, that you give these institutions advance notice and the opportunity to challenge this decision. So in other words, when he did this executive order that said we are immediately revoking funding from schools who are non-compliant, and of course he set up that whole portal and everything so they could figure out who was non-compliant. That was a direct violation of a 50-year-old law, okay? Again, this law recognizes that education is primarily a state and local responsibility, and it limits federal overreach. Okay. The other thing is this. If you want to use GEPA in reverse, this is also why he's losing these court cases. Because just like the federal government cannot say you must teach CRT, you must teach DEI, or you must have DEI programs, or you must have SEL programs, the federal government cannot do that. They cannot force you to teach any particular curriculum. The federal government is also prohibited from restricting a specific curriculum. So, in other words, when they're trying to force schools and say you cannot teach DEI, you cannot teach SEL, you cannot teach CRT, they're also violating GEPA because they're not leaving it up to the states to decide. The federal government is not allowed to do this. They're just not. So I would encourage you to read up on this more if you'd like. It's an interesting subject for me. And of course, for people who have my same neurological makeup, you know that we can go down the rabbit hole and look for these details and read up on this, and I could spend all day on it. But also, a study came out recently that said that if we're going to change people's minds, that people who are, if they're going to change their mind about something, or if they're on the fence about something, the people who have the most influence over them changing their mind is friends and family. So I don't expect, if you have family members who have, all the stickers and the big truck and the flags and the hats and all that, I don't expect you to put yourself in danger and put yourself in any kind of weird situation and try to change their mind. But if you do have people who are kind of on the fence, who, maybe their whole lives they've voted Republican, and so they still want to vote Republican, but fundamentally they know that there's a lot about this that isn't right. I would encourage you to gently just keep stating the facts. That's all we can do. I'm not screaming at people. I'm not, I'm not doing any of that, but we can create change, and, we have to create change. It's up to us. Remember, only about 23% of the U.S. population voted for him. More people voted against him than for him. So remember that, okay? We are not the minority here. They do not have a mandate. More people voted against him than for him. So again, if you want to look it up, it's the GEPA, the General Education Provisions Act. It's from 1974. The court case that he lost was, I believe it was a federal court decision, so it has not gone to the Supreme Court yet. I don't know if it will. Let me see what else. I guess he just, anyway, his attempt to cut funding for DEI programs or from schools who are implementing DEI programs, they clashed with the GEPA, okay, which ensures fair procedures, procedural safeguards, limited executive outreach, and preventing arbitrary funding decisions, right? He's not allowed to do this, and he's losing these court cases. So remember that. Okay, have a great day. If you go to adayinourshoes.com, on the front page, I have a thing that kind of circles around pictures. I just launched a new anxiety at school toolkit. So I invite you to check that out. That was done by popular demand. People kept saying, I need more stuff to do for anxiety. I need more anxiety information. It's still a work in progress. I still have a couple of sections I want to add to it. But so far it's fantastic. It's 14 different tools, modules, videos, to help you advocate better for your child who is experiencing anxiety, school refusal, and things like that. So enjoy the rest of your day. I know I will. And take care. I'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to Don't IEP Alone with Special Education Advocate Lisa Lightner. We're so glad you've joined us and would love to connect with you outside of the show. For more information about Lisa, the IEP Toolkit, and more ways we can help you in your process, go to adayinourshoes.com. From self-care tips to common IEP mistakes, there's even more to explore. Don't forget to rate and review the podcast and subscribe to never miss an episode. Until next time, don't IEP alone, and you don't have to.